Hey, you're on.
I am? Okay, good. Can you hear me all right?
Great. So, thanks for being with us. That's very exciting for us. Laurie, really appreciate it. Where am I catching you?
At home. This is
Okay,
yeah.
where's home? Tell the
Uh,
rest of the people. Yeah.
okay, San Francisco. Yeah,
Oh, very
yeah,
cool.
yeah,
Excellent.
yeah.
Exciting. So again, thanks for finding the time to speak with us, and I appreciate Bram for the help. Also, um, I'll give you a little background about Amass if you got a chance. I know you spoke with Bram, but really want to hear with you the idea behind the Instagram Live is
Yeah.
that we take this material and we keep on using it on different social media, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, etc., LinkedIn, is to expose people to a different way of looking at construction and material.
Mhm.
I myself, as the CEO of Amast, has 20 years of development experience, and one of the things I found is that it's a very I think the best way to say it, I used in the past, is that it's a lonely industry. Uh, People, especially the typical contractor, not people who are very high end,
Uh,
they use the same material, the same patterns again and again because that's what they know. And one of the commitment that a mast has as a marketplace for construction material is to expose people to different way of thinking, to different
mhm.
material, different way of doing work, so they can broaden their ability and they get better. If it's environmentally better, if it's work wise, saving time, saving money, etc.
Mhm.
So, so Laurie, why don't you tell people a little bit
Okay,
who you are, what's your
okay,
experience, anything?
okay. All right. Well, I'm a retired architect now. I worked for the past or 31 years, 4 months, and 3 days for Gensler in San Francisco. Though during my time at Gensler, I worked in multiple offices, Seattle, Los Angeles, and I did projects abroad in Shanghai and Beijing,
It's a
Taiwan,
huge,
Bangkok,
it's a huge firm. Whomever
Singapore,
doesn't know,
and
yeah,
yeah, yeah. When I started, it was a small firm of about 400 plus people, and now it's
small
uh,
firm, yeah,
yeah, now it's
yeah,
about six. I don't, you lose count. It was
yeah.
between 5 and 6,000 people with 40 something offices. Though in the past year, obviously, like many firms, it's downsized a bit. Yeah.
And why? It's interesting because we'll see how the conversation is going to go. But
Yeah.
why would someone use such a large architectural firm? Just from your
Well,
experience, for being there for so long.
yeah. Well, initially it's because it's because of the reputation. It's because of we were many locations, so large corporations like to have a company that was located in multiple cities or could work globally, and they weren't a slave to a particular location or a particular time zone, uh, and that that kind of helped us a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And uh, how would you, looking back, you have such a broad exposure to how things have, how would you say things have changed from the time you started to you retired, or even now, what
Oh,
you still at?
well,
Yeah,
they changed radically during all my entire work career because I literally, started working with, you know, uh, paper and pencil and paper, and
yeah,
saw the whole evolution of integration of computers, and now computer modeling and uh, technology, which is now everywhere, and uh, and it's great. I mean, it's gotten. Initially, it was interesting. Initially, it was a barrier. Only the largest firms really could afford the technology because it was so expensive. And
yeah.
now, yeah,
For years, I remember my mom had the tilted table in her bedroom
yeah,
that she has to like roll the
oh yeah,
roller up and down and change, blueprints on it because she
oh
was,
yeah,
her background's architecture. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So now everything's digital and everything's relatively inexpensive, which is great because now, I mean, now a small 2 or 3 person firm can put together a proposal, and when it lands on a client's desk, it it could look as good or better than anything that a 1,000 person firm could put together.
yeah.
So the 1,000 person has
What would you
specific
say?
staff working on those things. Yeah,
Yeah. So from the contractor perspective of the client, whether it's a developer or
yeah.
whomever is hiring the architect, what would you say is the biggest shift in the last 10 years in the world of
I
architectural
think
work?
probably the biggest shift is from the traditional siloed approach of the architect, the contractor, the developer, everybody being kind of a separate entity. Now they're more joint venture. Everything's integrated. When I first started out of school, the idea of getting bids and opening bids, physically opening bids and announcing them in a room, and was the traditional approach. And I would say that probably through most of the last few decades, the contractor is on board, or the contractors are interviewed before the design, at the very, even probably before the design process begins. And I
Really?
think that because my success has been that I've worked so closely with contractors, and as a detailer, it's been great because you learn from them, and then your documentation is relevant. If you separate things, if you finish an entire set of CDs and then you randomly send it out to a bunch of contractors, they all have different abilities as well. And they're all going to look at the exact same detail and have a different interpretation of it. So it's definitely the collaborative nature, which I've been working with for decades, is now the norm. And but probably towards the end of my career, the biggest shift is that there's no hierarchy. It's very lateral. That the owner, the contractor, the developer, the architect, the designer, all the consultants tend to work more laterally than hierarchically, which
Yeah.
makes for a much better product. Yeah.
It's interesting because I think the major reason why I started Amass, and we're trying to bring transparency and more integrity to an industry that, from my experience as a residential developer in New York City, has very little of that, very little transparency, very little integrity, and still in the small scale buildings and up to, I would say, 60, 80 unit non-union jobs. It's you buy from the same contractor, you see the same lumber yards or the same plumbing supply. If you're a plumber, you don't get opportunity to expose yourself to new material and new opportunities from buying who's giving you better service or better price, etc. So it's actually interesting that you're saying that as time progressed and technology was brought to the space, there was more integration, there was more of a kind of democratic experience in the process and partnership. So I hope it's trickles down, because in the material world, we're new, and many people I speak with, and I say, hey, join Amass, and you can expose yourself to other opportunities to buy material and then try different materials. They like the idea, but they're not there mentally yet. They don't understand that the world is going that direction. Yeah.
Well, I could say that a lot of architects and designers throughout their career, it's basically built on often a palette of materials that they have used and they're most familiar with. And you can look at many, named designers, and you can sometimes recognize them by just looking at the building or the interior material. And the advantage to that is that you can spend years developing those details, and finding those details change. You can modify the detail to meet the installation. The challenge with new materials is that they're unproven, and part of a reputation is the quality of your design, and often the quality of how it holds up. So when there's this fabulous new material, you really want to use it, but you have to convince the client and the contractor that it's unproven, and they're
which is a big problem, right? Because then you're basically killing innovation. Right?
So you have to have the advantage. Most of my career was in corporate interiors, so at least we were limited in our exposure. I mean, obviously you clad a building, and if the material fails, then you've got millions of square feet of product that's exposed. But if you put up a finish and it's exposed to the sun or it delaminates. Worst case scenario is you've got a room or an area that needs to be reworked. And that's sometimes a risk that a client is willing to take. And I've worked mostly commercial, but residential, they're generally on the high end, of course, they're more acceptable of experimentation, and they generally aren't as budget conscious as commercial clients.
Yeah, I think the higher end level, because as a developer, again, what ran many times the show is, first of all, the budget. Can I afford selling those units later on to someone for the price going to cost me? But also, am I exposed to lawsuits if it's a condo building, etc.? So if I find a new innovative system with the insulation, water resistant issues, or heating, cooling, etc., and it's not going to work perfectly, I'm going to have to deal with many lawsuits from buyers, and sometimes it really kills the innovation. So that's kind of like a tug of war that is really out there, that you have to find a balance.
I believe that. I was
Ahead.
going to say that the residential side is much more litigious than the commercial side, because basically you build a building, and when you walk away from it, as commercial side, you have the building owner, and then you have all the people who sublet from it. But if you're doing a residential development and you're selling individual units, you're walking away, and suddenly there's 50 or 100 people, and you're their target every time something goes wrong. So it's probably been the biggest deterrent to innovation on a residential side.
So you're saying that technology and mainly computers, if I understood you correctly, made the biggest shift in your career.
I think so.
If you could jump 10 years from now, and kind of be a futuristic.
Thanks. Oh, please. There's a reason I retired.
So that it's perfect, because then you don't have to worry about what you're going to say, because it's just a prediction, right?
Sure.
So what would you say is the next jump from a development, from an innovation perspective in the world of construction, in the world of development, real estate development?
Yeah. Well, from the development side, I think that what I just noticed the other day when I was driving across town is the post-COVID reinterpretation of the commercial environment.
Say more about that. That's fascinating.
Well, the last year is like downtown is a ghost town, and
New York is the same. Correct.
It's like the biggest buildings are all virtually empty. I mean, there's very very little people getting in and out of buildings. I mean, the logistics of just getting in and out of a building involving elevators during COVID is a logistic nightmare. So I think it's going to be very different. Yeah.
You think it's the death of skyscrapers?
Oh, no. They're there. They'll always be there. The way they're used, the way they're used is going to be different, I believe. We saw a mini version of this, I think, post 9/11, when, people, suddenly were able to, they thought with the loss of the World Trade Center that suddenly there would be this big demand for commercial space. Well, within minutes, most of the buildings or the companies that had been in that center had co-located, and they were up and running, and it took years for the commercial office building market, even in New York, to regenerate. Well, now we have, millions of square feet all over the world that are underutilized. And of course, all the commercial, small, commercial businesses that's fed off of those invigorated downtowns, they're all going out of business, or they're closed because there's nobody down there anymore. So there'll be a lot of subletting. We saw that back in 2000, San Francisco, 2000, after the what is it, the .com bomb.
The bubble, exactly.
Yeah,
the bubble.
It's like suddenly people who had, built massive spaces at ridiculous rents and ridiculous budgets were suddenly out of business. And so there was a huge growth industry in redesigning office spaces as they because they had the lease, they had to sublet them. So everything we had designed before, not everything, but many of the spaces we had designed before, we were redesigning them for new clients. It's because we were subletting the same space. So, but I see that sort of here again. Is it, you know, people
So
people will
the
always want to
question,
go to an office, right? People will
do you
always,
think so? Do you believe that people will, whether it's going to take 6 months, a year, a vaccine,
no,
whatever it is, we're going to go back to traditional 9 to 5, 5 days a week in an office?
no, not completely, but more than, you know, more obviously we're not doing it at all now.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I think that you know, people have always liked the idea of working from home, and there was a hesitancy to do it because they felt that it was disruptive. Now everybody's working from home; they're Zooming nonstop,
hmm
and it's not, it's okay, but given the alternative, it should be, that should be the supplement. And because the, you know, and the office space, you know, just before COVID was changing radically. I mean, there was very, and again, because rents were going up, spaces were more limited. So we
yeah,
were, workspace design was in analyzing how people worked and what was the best solution for it. And with it, you know, it's like nobody has an assigned desk and nobody has an assigned phone. Everybody is mobile all the time. Well, that's why the shift to working at home actually went as well as it did, because people were already halfway there. But going
yeah,
back to the office, there's still uh, no substitute for, you know, brainstorming in a room and getting
yeah.
all together and the firsthand contact. It's that's still it's, you know, it's the reason I stayed with a large firm for so long is that I never wanted to lock myself in a room and just design by myself. I've always felt that the best work always comes from collaboration. And so
Yeah.
I think we'll move back to that. But these
The
office
question
buildings
also,
now
if
will change use.
yeah, the question is also, will people can be able to afford the crazy rents you see in the big cities if my average employee shows up only 3 or 3.5 days a week? Because I think there'll
Yeah,
be much more fluidity in the way you do your schedule. So,
right. Yeah,
so one of the reasons people go to work is because, yes, the brainstorming and everything, but a lot of it is to do, I think, with more of social pressure to, I have to show up. I have to show my boss that I showed up. I think it's going to
no,
be more effective
uh,
through technology and Zoom. Not
no,
everybody, but it
no.
seems.
I think a lot of people were over that even before the COVID. Is that I was very, you know, regimented in my work hours, but I
Yeah.
can't say that that's universal. Because
Yes.
you know, I always, came early, worked late, like most architects. But
Well, you're passionate. Maybe you're probably passionate about what you did,
yes,
and you also were rigorous about what you
yeah.
did. And but the average lower middle management, not always. When you look at a company
Well,
that has,
yeah,
150,000 employees, not everybody
right,
is,
yeah, yeah,
has that commitment and that integrity you're talking about,
right.
right? So, yeah. So the question will be, will they be able to afford that rent? And if not, how would landlords, how will buildings that are very expensive to maintain, to keep the land will, it will be interesting.
I think the market will just have to adjust. I mean, it's like the rental market in San Francisco. There's a lot of talk about how the rents keep or going down, but they were overpriced, and if the market always finds the right price. So uh, the people who will suffer are the developers who developed a project with a target rent that they can't go below. You know, it's like the profits will be less, but people will
Yeah,
still rent.
yeah,
And so I think that the markets will always kind of work themselves out, but the rents
mm,
will, because after, 2000, the rents dropped significantly, and it took many, many years for them to get back up to those levels. And it's just a correction in that respect. But beyond
yeah,
just the financial rent part of it, it's the usage of the space, which I think is going to be really interesting because people are going to have to rethink uh, how you use the office, and I think that people are not going to need necessarily as much space, as they had before. And so they might take less space, but eventually maybe some of the rents will go back up and down. Because in the Bay Area, it was all
When you say
a lot of them
reuse,
were
I just
driven.
want to kind of,
What's that?
yeah, I want to understand. So are you looking more of the kind of share space mentality, the WeWork of the world? Do you think
Um,
that's a direction from a design perspective, the world is going towards more flexible spaces?
well, I think that those will be useful, but I think that just the flexibility will still occur in traditional companies. But I don't. And for the startups, they'll probably go through the WeWork phase. But I think ultimately, uh, people like to have an office, and I don't think
Yeah.
that offices will
And a
ever go away.
cubicle, some
Yeah,
privacy. Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
What it will, what
Understand.
the working at home thing is going to do, and since it's, and particularly because now it's so global, is it's going to open up new areas for development. Like obviously San Francisco, New York, the big cities, they may take a hit, but the second and third tier cities, which I thought back in like 2000 when everything was tech and it was going to be decentralized, and back then people couldn't find spaces in New York, so people would open a company in New York, but or in San Francisco, but all their staff was in Salt Lake City or was in
Yeah.
Portland, Oregon. And I think that that's going to be there. Maybe it's going to be some really great spaces in, you know, uh, suburban old towns, like in the Northeast, mill towns that have these great buildings, but they never really uh, made the transition from being a factory to being a trendy workspace. It's
Yeah. So
so like
you
the
see,
Williamsburg effect, but it goes to Connecticut or to Vermont or outside of Boston. Yeah.
so the next epidemic will be hipstery.
Well,
So
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
perhaps, yeah.
So you think that there's a possibility or probability that we are going to see less of a magnet to San Francisco, LA, New York, the big cities, and then Miami maybe, and then more of kind of the 30, 40 small urban experiences in middle,
Yeah,
like Austin and other places
yeah,
like that?
yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
think that's quite possible. I don't think obviously the cities are not going to die, but I think they're not going to feel the pressure that they did before the pandemic. The exodus, because people wanted to work a place, but they couldn't afford to live there. So now they don't. And actually, you can see that corporations are relocating
Mhm.
because they realized that they came to the Bay Area because of the venture capital and of the work staff was educated and very techy. But now people aren't tied to that as much anymore.
To the geographic location.
Yeah,
Yeah.
their flexibility is much greater, and so once you can you know travel again and get out and hang out in a cafe. I used to joke half the cafes in my neighborhood were before the pandemic were basically every desk was an office,
Correct.
and that was
Correct.
nice. It's like the people who ran the cafes, they should have charged rent for those tables as opposed to just people buy a very expensive cup of coffee and sit there for two
Yeah.
hours. That's cheap rent. Yeah,
Yeah. That's correct.
yeah.
Laurie,
Sorry.
so one of the reasons I like a
Mhm.
mask,
Yeah,
the Instagram live is because we never know where the conversation is going to go. So
right.
it's great to speak about the urban thing. I know from what I read a little bit that you actually specialize in stairs,
Yeah.
correct?
Yep.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then you spoke about elevators all the time. So
Yeah. Yeah. But
you know,
I love stairs. And it's just a kind of I've always been fascinated with them. And at Gensler, I kind of accidentally fell into a niche where a friend of mine had trouble with one and asked me to help, and it just snowballed. And then more people asked, and
what's the
more
biggest
people asked.
challenge with stairs?
What's that? It's just
What's the
the
biggest challenge with stairs?
Well, I don't see any of them as big challenges. I think they're fascinating, but
Yeah.
they're intimidating to people because, a lot of people, especially in corporate, it's like 90% of your work, probably more, is a single floor, and that's your spatial thing. And this is one of the few elements in any design that breaks through the envelope. And so you have to really think about, in terms of not just the design, the
Oh, I think, did I lose you? The connection? Laurie,
and
can you hear me? Okay,
yes.
sorry.
Okay.
There's some internet connection problems. I don't know if it's with you and
Okay.
me, but I missed the last sentence you said about the stairs.
Okay. So it's the way that it's perceived experientially, and physically, to me, they're one of the more interesting and sculptural elements of any design. And I mostly dealt with monumental, which were the higher end, focus. So I love that.
Did you get a chance? Yeah, did you get a chance to visit Goldman Sachs New York office, the new office they built by any chance?
No,
I
I
think they've been there
don't.
for. Okay.
But I probably, if I didn't see it, somebody probably sent me a photograph of it.
Yeah, it is. I think it's one of the most beautiful
Yeah.
stairs I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. Is it relatively
It
new?
was actually,
Yeah. I think I know. I
yeah,
think I know which one you're talking about.
but it's exactly what you're speaking about. There's an element of art and sculpture
Yeah.
to the stairs that
Yeah.
separating the lobby when you get into the fourth floor and you go into the Goldman Sachs offices. It's absolutely fascinating. Whoever was the, I don't know who the architect is, but it's a major artistic statement by doing it.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah.
Laurie, thank you.
Okay.
I really appreciate
Yeah.
the time you
Okay.
spent with us. It's
Okay.
nothing but a pleasure to
Okay.
pick your brain
Well,
on a Friday afternoon.
didn't talk too much about materials, but
Exactly, but
hope it
who
was
cares? We're
worthwhile. Okay.
about the
Yeah.
community. Sometimes, it's sometimes we speak about materials, sometimes we speak about, how do we see the future of architect and design. So that's part of the fun of having this conversation. I really appreciate it. We're gonna chop, edit sections of it and send it to different social medias. So I'm sure you're gonna get some feedbacks from it. And again, thank you so much for your generous time. I'm looking forward to keeping in touch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Take
Okay.
care, everybody. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.